Alrighty, so it is week 3. We are starting to look specifically at picture books. We are going to have picture books this week. We're going to do critical perspective on picture books next week. And then we're going to start jumping into looking at diversity in children's literature. So this week is going to be light on kind of like lecture PowerPoint stuff. Um, but you're going to need to kind of challenge yourself to slow down as you are reading and take time to look at where words are pictured, the size, font, color, also the like use of color on pages or lack of color, where characters are positioned. So you're going to really need to try to slow yourself down and take the time to look at each individual page as you are reading the picture book for this week, which should be another. We also have a secondary reading that is kind of more of a textbook reading to give us some more context as we are looking at picture books. That context also is designed to try to help you as you are pausing and looking at the pages to figure out what you should be trying to focus on or what you should be trying to figure out as you're looking at these pages. So we're talking about is decoding the ability to like look at something or see a specific type of formula and take it apart to be able to better understand what is actually going on and like how some of these moving parts or different elements are working together or working against each other, but still able to like help better understand what's going on. When we're talking about decoding picture books, there's kind of 4 basic questions, like elements to pay attention to. So the first one is like, how is the book actually constructed? This is really hard since we're online. This would be asking you to be able to physically look at the book, feel the cover, feel the binding, feel the pages, to see like what type of textures might be in the cover. How might the binding be created, because there's different types of binding. Most stuff is used with kind of think of it kind of like book super glue. But if you're looking at like older picture books, there's a difference in like quality and a difference in the way that things were produced. You're looking also at what like how were these pages created? So was it using watercolor? Was it using some sort of digital program? And that's really hard to tell when you do not have the physical book. So if you get kind of stumped trying to look at this, Google, see if you can find answers. If you are fortunate enough to have a physical copy of any of the books that we're going to be dealing with for picture books, this is a lot easier to determine if you've got that physical text in front of you. The second question is, how is the page formatted? So like literally, if you're looking at a page, where are the words? Are they all in one location? Are they scattered throughout the page? Are they designed to kind of make your eye go from one specific spot and kind of travel down the page and end at a different spot? Same thing with the images. Are the images like, are all of the characters or all of the like vibrant parts to the page in one specific location? Is it kind of spread out? Is there this really big like background um like image, and so you're trying to kind of focus on all of that, or do you have that background and then like a very specific part that your eye is supposed to pay attention to? When we're talking about characters, you want to see like where are they physically on the page, but also if there's more than one character, who's closest to the reader, who's facing the reader, who's potentially faced away from the reader or other characters. We are literally, it's going to feel really weird. You are going to spend a crazy amount of time looking at one specific page, trying to figure all of this out. Some of these you're not going to have answers for, and that's okay, but you really want to pay attention to how the page is designed, so where things are at. The third question is looking at the font style. So is it like an all caps font? Are there specific parts of the font that are very tiny and some that are really large? Are there different colors to the font? Are there specific words that are a different color? The end papers, again, is kind of a little bit hard to explain without having a physical book. Um, But the end papers are the pieces of paper before the story actually starts and after the story ends. So it's usually the page where you have like the title and the author on the inside. And then on the end is usually where there's some sort of like author's note. So sometimes when we have picture books, and the book for this week is a really good example. If you do not pay attention to those before the story start end pages and after the story ends end pages, you actually miss some of the story that can completely change your understanding of what is going on. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Digitally, you should have access to them, but it is a little bit easier to try and find them when you physically have a book because you can flip through and be like, oh, this is right before, instead of clicking and going, well, this is what I have access to. Pay attention to the cover art, like the covers of your picture books, and then also like the back cover art. Sometimes the book is designed where your cover and your back cover, if you open it all the way, it's one cohesive image. That's really, really neat. It's not necessarily like it's rare, but it's not super common because usually you'll have your front has one specific image, your back has a separate, like a separate image. Um, you're going to want to pay attention to color, especially depending on what's going on in the story. So you're wanting to see like, okay, is the story dealing with like really intense emotions, but like there's a lot of really bright color, or is it like a really like happy-go-lucky character, but there's a lot of really dull colors that are being used? Um, orientation is just like, is the book um my hands are trying to mirror this. Like, does the book open like a normal book in the US? Do you read it from right to left? Does it open top to bottom and you read it from like bottom to top? How are you supposed to read through this? Size is another one that's kind of hard since we're asynchronous. There is no standard size for picture books. You can have picture books that are like 4 inches by like 6 inches. You can have picture books that are like 2.5 feet by 3 feet, like just massive. So with your screen, try to figure it out. Again, if you're like, this is really important to you because you're really tactile, you like physical things, just Google. We don't have any example of these for any of our picture books for the next couple of weeks, but there are some picture books that are not square or rectangular. They're literally in a different shape. So sometimes it's like octagonal or hexagonal. So you're not going to have to worry necessarily about the shape of these books, but that is something to pay attention to when you're looking at picture books. The last question is really important to kind of help us figure out how are all of these previous question elements working together. You are going to want to look at the words and the images across the entire book. You obviously can focus on 1 or 2 pages, but you're going to want to kind of like mentally pay attention across the entire book. How are the words and the images like related to each other? So you're looking for whether the words in the picture book are contradictory, like are the words are not matching what we're seeing in the images. We're wanting to look to see if the words and images are asymmetrical. So like the words are literally positioned like asymmetrically from the images, and like it's kind of like a stagnant kind of like diagonal across the page. And then the last kind of relationship is whether the words and the images are complementary. We usually see contradictory and complementary when we're talking about picture books. If the words and the images are complementary, the words literally describe what we see in the images. So that's kind of like for this week, that is that big thing that we're looking for. How are the different elements working together? How is that synergy? Those different elements working together to make this book function and work well. So that's the big heart of what we're looking at. You're going to want to use these previous questions when you're looking at another, which is our picture book for this week, but also I have some examples to kind of, I'm not going to walk through all of them, but I'll do a first couple just to give you an idea of like, you're going to need to spend some time staring at these pages. So if this is our first one, let's go back. Our first one is how is it constructed? What are our coloring techniques? Technology. Again, you might have to Google. I'm not going to Google just for the purposes of like trying to keep this short as I can. So if we're looking at this, we do have some bright colors, but they are a little bit dull still. So we have some, sorry, my cat is by my mouse. Excuse me, sweet girl. We do have some of the brightness from the yellow. We've got some red that's popping up. We do have some spots of the white, but it is kind of like rather dull in color. Um, it actually looks like it is watercolor if you look at the waves. So is this super helpful for what we're doing right now? Like looking at like what it's actually made of? Like not necessarily, but it is good to pay attention to. Our second question again is how is it formatted? So we're looking at the words, images, and characters. This first one's pretty simple. We've got a field in our very far background. Can't really tell what's being planted, but we've got that field. We also have a tree house on top of a hill, or at least a tree. Maybe it's a tree house in the tree on the top of a hill. Closer to us, we have this ocean, or maybe it's a lake water. We see our main character who's at kind of as close to us as possible. And then right in front of them are the four little fish. So we've got our eyes are drawn to that bottom left corner because that's where our main character is, but our words are in the kind of like upper right hand corner. So we're kind of being pulled both ways. And it's designed this way, this page is laid out because there's less color where the words are and more color where the character is. You are supposed to look at those words first, read them, take them in, and then let yourself be drawn to look at the character. If you naturally looked at the character and then realized, oh, right, there's words, it doesn't mean that you're reading it wrong. It just means that for you, your brain is already focusing on what you're supposed to focus on for this page. And you are going to have to slow yourself down to take a look at the entire page. We also have, and this is a little bit unique for this book. We do have a little bit of words towards the very bottom right, but they're much smaller. We're going to get into that in just a second. Our third question is like, what do you notice about font size? We don't have end papers, we don't have cover art, but we're looking at color, size, font, things like that. And I kind of had already mentioned, we've got feeling as our brightest, like biggest word that draws the most attention to our eyes. And then we should see blown away as like the next biggest chunk of words. And this might be debatable, but it looks like potentially that this question at the very end is actually the smallest font. So if we look at these words, it reads, feeling even the darkest storm passes. The sun can't shine bright every day. We can sit with our feelings and notice how they roll through us, then blow away. What kinds of things make you feel happy? If we're looking at that word choice, this ends on a question of what makes you feel happy. And that happiness might contradict with your understanding of happiness when you are looking at this image. For most of us, this is not going to elicit a happy feeling. This is going to be like stress or fear, or overwhelming feelings. It's not going to be a happiness thing. So font wise, it's pretty standard. It's clean font. So I don't think it's Times New Roman, but like it's really easy to tell what letters are what. You're not trying to guess what a word is particularly saying. We do have some words that are bigger than others that we should be focusing more on. For this specific page, it's really interesting that it's feeling that we've got like a dark storm. We're obviously seeing a dark storm, but apparently this dark storm is passing. Then the sun can't shine, so maybe that background with those hills that have the sun on them is supposed to be that like representative of the storm passing. We've got the next few lines that talk about how like our feelings can roll through us. We have the waves literally, but to me, this is a contradiction because it doesn't look like we're rolling through the waves. It looks like we're trying to not have our boat capsize because the waves are literally like over our character's boat. So to me, that's a contradiction. To you, if you have more boating experience, that might make more sense, right? You're gonna potentially look like you're capsizing, but you know that like that's just kind of the how boats move through the ocean. And then it ends with like the feelings being blown away. We know that there's a storm. The rain's kind of at a slant, so we do have some wind in here. But we're not really seeing that blown away part. And then we have a really soft, quiet question of what kinds of things make you feel happy? This is a really, really complex page. And we don't have a lot of context because we don't have any other pages to look at. But there's a lot to dig into just with this. We're going to look at that fourth question again really quickly. So we're looking at all of the elements that we've kind of been talking about. And I'd already said this. For this specific page, those words versus what we're seeing, to me, in my interpretation, are kind of contradictory, right? Because the words change very drastically with that very last question. For you might be sitting there going, no, this is matching up in my brain. Like the words are matching what I'm seeing. It's complex. There's a sense of kind of like urgency and danger in the words, and we're also seeing that in the image. For you, then this image would be complementary. That fourth question is really important because it's kind of our analysis question. Your answer is going to be different depending on who you are as a person. So there's not necessarily one right or wrong answer for that fourth question. You have to have support for why you think it's one or the other. To me, like I said, this is contradictory, but also if we're looking at the positioning of the words and the imagery, it's also kind of asymmetrical as well. So when you are looking at the examples and you're reading through another and you're working on question 4, a picture book, a specific page can be more than one type of synergy going on. It can be contradictory. It can be asymmetrical in the same thing. It could be complementary and contradictory. It could be complementary and asymmetrical. So those 3 things, you can have more than one at one time in a specific book. I would focus on if there are 2, find the 2 that are the strongest. You will find some examples where all 3 of those are true for a picture book. You're going to want to find the 2 of those 3 that you can find the most evidence to support why you think that that book has those elements going on. So that was really quick kind of breakdown of how these 4 questions work when we're looking at one specific page. Because this is kind of like our first week digging into picture books, I do have a couple of other examples for you. I'm not going to walk you through them, but I would like you to kind of mentally take yourself through the different questions so that you get some more practice. I will point out that there is not a lot going on this second example. We do have a teeny tiny frog on a rock on the bottom right hand corner, and it sort of looks like the frog's looking at the small child, and the small child might be looking at the frog. Pay attention to like what's not here. Pay attention to the body language of our child. But again, I would pause, look through it, look through those 4 questions just to get some more practice. Our third one is a little bit more potentially of a traditional example of what we might see in a picture book. The wording layout is a little bit more complex here. At our foreground, closest to us is that lion on the rock. At the back, we have all of those other animals. Pay close attention to their facial expressions. Some of them might be hard to tell, but that might give you some idea of what's potentially going on. A little bit more than if you just focus on the lion. again, I would pause, go through those 4 questions, get that extra practice. And this is our last one. There are no words, so this is very much like Another. If you're not familiar with wordless picture books, Another might be more of a challenge for you to read through because you're really having to look at the images. So we've got 2 different main characters. We've got a very terrifying cat. Maybe it's scared, maybe it's angry. Not sure. We've got 2 birds. There's a bunch of other random objects. Think about place. Where could this be? Why are these children here? What are they actually doing? Is that their boat in the tree? Like, what is going on? This is the most complex because we don't have guidance with any sort of words. We are trying to, as readers, piece things together. So you should, if you're looking at this 4th one, have a lot of theories as answers about what is potentially going on. So Another, your reading for this week, our picture book is going to challenge you because we don't have those words. It's going to force you to come up with different theories and kind of use your imagination of what plot line, what stories could make the events that you see in Another realistic to have happen. I will give you one last hint for Another. Pay close attention to the colors on your different characters. So our main girl at the beginning and her cat, pay attention to the color of the cat's collar, pay attention to the color of the cat toy, and pay attention to the color of the girl's dress. Once you're done looking at this last example, the last bit of this is on Another. So if you have gone through the examples and you're working on reading it and you feel like you need a little bit more guidance, I would just start very basic. Do you think you enjoyed reading through the picture book? What did you notice about the story? And then what did you notice about the images? Because Another does not have any words to it, you might have issues coming up with what the story could be. So focus on those images. Focus on what would make sense going from image on page 1 to page 2. You will kind of end up creating the story on your own as you are looking through it. But these would be the 3 questions I would start off with to get an answer before you start doing your decoding, because Another is a very, very different type of picture book. To give you more kind of constructive things to help you with decoding Another, I have some questions that are listed. You do not have to answer all of them. If you want to focus on the 4 questions at the beginning because those make sense to you, that's fine. These questions are here just to try and help give you some different questions to take apart the novel. You might want to focus on looking at, like, where are we setting wise? Where could we be? You might want to focus on whether the story or the images that you are coming up with and kind of figuring out are believable to you. You might want to focus on looking at how are the other characters interacting with each other, and what might that be telling us? These are just here as extra questions to try to help you if you get kind of stumped with the first 4.